I woke up to the sound of gunshots. Not loud, dramatic, movie-style gunshots, just that muffled pop-pop you hear from a small-caliber rifle, distant but unmistakable. Out here in Cedar Creek Crossing, things like that aren't just unusual. They're supposed to be impossible. It's the kind of place where neighbors wave, kids sell lemonade, and everyone's lawn is exactly 2 inches high because it's written in the bylaws. People don't shoot guns at 7 in the morning. I threw on jeans, barefoot, still shaking off sleep, and bolted outside. I was halfway down the back steps when I saw the feathers, tufts of chestnut and gold littering the grass like confetti from a nightmare. My chickens, my damn chickens, and standing right in the middle of the coop, clutching a small hunting rifle and grinning like she'd just won the lottery, was Judith Cranley. Judith, HOA President, perpetually wearing coral-colored blouses and power-walking sneakers, a woman with the voice of a kindergarten teacher and the heart of a Bond villain. I'd seen her ruin a man's life over unauthorized garden gnomes. She once made a retiree cry at a meeting because his mailbox paint was the wrong sheen. "You're welcome," she chirped, cocking her head as she nudged one of the hens with her shoe. Feral livestock are a health hazard. Technically, this counts as pest control. I stared at her, too stunned to speak. She'd climbed my fence, shot my chickens, and she smiled. "They were in a locked coop," I finally said, low and sharp. "Domesticated, registered, legal." Judith's smile faltered for half a second. "Well, they were loud. You've already been warned about excessive noise." I had received a note, folded and stuffed into my mailbox last week in an envelope labeled "Urgent Violation, Unsanctioned Livestock Noise." But that wasn't unusual for Judith. Everyone in the neighborhood had gotten one of her little warnings at some point. Dave caught a fine for planting begonias in the wrong color scheme. The Sanders were forced to repaint their house after she claimed the shade of beige was emotionally disruptive. But this was beyond a note or a fine. This was trespassing, destruction of property, animal cruelty, and what Judith Cranley didn't know, what she should have known, is that killing someone's livestock in the state of Virginia is a felony. And I had everything recorded on the security cameras I installed after she fined me for improper curtain symmetry. "Oh, Judith," I said quietly, "you really stepped in it this time." Her smile didn't waver. She actually laughed. "Please, you think anyone will care? I am the HOA. I enforce the rules." She walked away, rifle slung casually over her shoulder like we were done here, like she hadn't just detonated a war. I didn't chase after her. I went inside, poured coffee with shaking hands, and watched the footage from the coop cam. Clear as day, Judith climbing the fence, unlocking the coop, lining up her shots like she was at the county fair. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about chickens. It never had been. Judith wasn't trying to keep Cedar Creek peaceful. She was trying to own it. Every little bylaw violation, every snide letter, every public humiliation, it was all part of her slow, creeping power grab, and no one was stopping her. Not yet. The very next day, I received a new letter, certified mail, embossed HOA letterhead. Notice of further violations, suspicion of unauthorized surveillance equipment and hostile behavior. She was fining me for my security cameras. "Keep pushing," I muttered, folding the letter in half. "See where it gets you." Over the next 2 weeks, Judith escalated like a toddler with a badge. My grass was now half an inch too long. The motion sensor lights I'd installed after the shooting were a glare nuisance. I received a $250 fine for threatening language during our conversation, even though she was the one holding a gun. But here's the kicker. She wasn't just after me. She started issuing mass citations. Entire blocks were slapped with violations. Lawn chairs left out past dusk. American flags deemed too political. A neighbor's kid got cited for using chalk on the sidewalk. The community WhatsApp exploded with outrage, but no one wanted to go on record. Everyone feared Judith, except me, because while she was writing fines, I was digging. I read the HOA bylaws cover to cover, twice. I met with county animal control. I cross-referenced her letters with actual municipal code, and the deeper I went, the more cracks I saw. Judith wasn't just overreaching. She was wrong. about so much. But the others needed proof. They needed a spark. So I gave them one. I posted the coop footage anonymously, shared it in the neighborhood forum under the subject line, "Is this legal?" And then I waited. 3 hours later, the thread had over 400 comments. The video was being shared across Facebook groups and local news tip lines. People were furious, but scared. Because Judith had real power. She controlled the board. She controlled the budget. She controlled the narrative, until now. That evening I found a bright pink citation taped to my door. Community disruption. Intent to initiate eviction proceedings. She wanted me gone. She wasn't scared. Not yet. But that was about to change. Because I'd just found something buried in the HOA records, something she never thought anyone would see. And it changes. Everything. Tucked between page after page of draconian bylaws, I found it. Article 7, Section D, Subsection 9. A single line so unassuming, so bureaucratically worded, it might as well have been invisible. HOA board members must be full-time. Residents in good standing and maintain active property ownership within Cedar Creek Crossing. And suddenly, a dozen moments snapped into place like tumblers in a lock. I remember Judith mentioning, just once offhand, how she was staying at her sister's while her house was being fumigated. That was 6 months ago. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. But now, that meant she wasn't living in the community. And if she wasn't residing here full-time, she wasn't eligible to hold office, which meant every violation, every fine, every inch of power she'd wielded was built on a lie. But I couldn't go public yet. Not without more. I needed irrefutable proof she didn't live here. I started small, talked to neighbors near her house. "Oh, Judith." One shrugged. "Haven't seen her come or go in weeks." I posed as a surveyor and knocked on the door myself. No answer. The mailbox was overflowing, her flower beds dry, porch light out. The real smoking gun came 2 days later when I tracked down the property tax records online. Her mailing address was in Falls Church, not Cedar Creek. And while I was playing detective, Judith was amping up the psychological warfare. She wasn't subtle about it. One morning, I opened my mailbox and found it filled with shredded chicken feathers, a little calling card. Another day, I stepped outside to find a neon orange sticker on my truck windshield. Unapproved vehicle, to be towed. It was my own damn truck. Registered, clean, parked in my own driveway. Judith had taken the gloves off, and it wasn't just me anymore. A week after the coop incident, the Sanders, quiet, church-going folks who'd lived here for 20 years, received an official warning for unauthorized window decor. Their crime? Hanging Christmas lights before Thanksgiving. They took them down within an hour, but the fine still came. $400. By now, neighborhood morale was bottoming out. The HOA website began featuring a new banner. Preserving order. Maintaining excellence. As if Judith was expecting a revolution and doubling down on optics. That's when I saw it. The newsletter. Judith's voice, she called it. A glossy, 2-page propaganda sheet printed in Comic Sans and peppered with phrases like decency and civic virtue. It was delivered to every mailbox with a smiling photo of Judith in front of a flagpole and a cherry tree. This issue's headline, "A Time for Accountability, the Fight Against Dangerous Elements Within Our Community." Below was a thinly veiled screed against me. Never named, of course, but certain residents who resist the standards of harmony and sow division with fake news and doctored footage. It even quoted a supposed anonymous board source, calling me a growing liability. She was preparing to publicly destroy me, but I wasn't just sitting back. Every time she escalated, I matched her, quietly, strategically. I filed an anonymous request with the county clerk's office to verify her address records. I reached out to a former HOA board member, Steve, who Judith had unceremoniously pushed out last year after he questioned a sudden increase in HOA dues. Steve was bitter and, more importantly, willing to talk. He told me about Judith's private, meetings, how she rewrote voting procedures, how she bullied the board into silence. She'd even threatened legal action when someone tried to audit the HOA finances. "She thinks she's invincible," he said, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. "She's not. But she knows everyone's too afraid to go against her." "She'll make a mistake," I said. "She already has," Steve replied, eyes narrowing. "You just have to make everyone else see it." Judith must have sensed something was shifting, because her moves got louder. That weekend, she hosted what she called the Unity Picnic. Giant banners, paid catering, a bouncy house no one asked for, all underwritten by the HOA fund, which she controlled. She made a speech. Of course she did, a podium in the cul-de-sac, folding chairs, amplified mic so no one could miss a word. "We must remain vigilant against elements that threaten our peaceful way of life," she said, her coral blouse fluttering in the breeze. "Those who refuse to follow the rules must understand. There will be consequences." Then she turned directly toward me. "I will not allow Cedar Creek to descend into chaos." Applause, hesitant, half-hearted. People looked around nervously like they weren't sure if clapping might get them fined too. I just stood there, silent, watching. Because 2 hours before her little fascist barbecue, I'd slipped envelopes into every mailbox, unmarked, anonymous, no return address. Inside, a printed screenshot of the county database listing Judith's primary residence as her sister's home in Falls Church, along with a copy of the HOA bylaws and a highlight over Article 7, Section D, Subsection 9. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. Judith didn't know yet, but the fuse was lit. The next morning, she struck back. Hard. I opened my door to a clipboard-wielding man in a cheap suit and reflective sunglasses. "You're being served," he said flatly, handing me a thick packet. Inside, legal documents from the HOA, cease and desist, libel, intent to pursue damages for defamation. Judith wasn't just playing house tyrant anymore. She was going full, scorched earth. She was dragging me into court. That night, I sat on the porch, beer in hand, chickens gone, yard dark, watching her drive by slowly in her white Lexus. She didn't stop, just glared at me through the window like I was a roach she hadn't finished stomping. Let her think I was broken. Let her believe she'd won, because she didn't know about the USB drive I'd handed Steve earlier that afternoon. Or that he'd just scheduled a private meeting with 3 other former board members, all people she'd steamrolled, all people with axes to grind, and she definitely didn't know what we'd found in the HOA financial records. 1 entry, 1 name, 1 payment. A payment that could unravel everything, tucked deep in the HOA's quarterly expenditure spreadsheet, under a vague line item labeled Community Development Consultation, was a $60,700 check issued directly to Judith Cranley. Not her business, not a company, her personal name. And it wasn't the only one. There were 3 more, spaced out over 6 months, always just under the $7,000 threshold that would require automatic board oversight. Steve said he'd never approved them. The other former board members confirmed the same. And the best part? All 4 payments came after her official residence changed in the county system to her sister's address in Falls Church. She wasn't just an illegitimate board president. She was stealing from the HOA. Judith was committing fraud. But before we could drop the hammer, she made another move, one that told me she sensed the walls closing in, even if she didn't know from where. She showed up at my house, unannounced, middle of the afternoon. No witnesses. She didn't knock. Just strolled right up my porch like she owned it, and rapped on the door with a confident rhythm that felt practiced. I opened it slowly, deliberately, and leaned against the frame. "You lost?" I asked. Her smile was back, plastic and tight. "I wanted to give you a final opportunity to stop this," she said. "Stop what?" She gestured vaguely behind her like she was addressing an invisible audience. "The rumors, the fabricated documents, the forum posts. We both know you're behind them." I tilted my head. "And what if I am?" "Then I'll destroy you," she said flatly. No smile now, no performance, just those cold, shark-like eyes. Already trying, I said. Still standing. She stepped closer. This neighborhood has rules, structure. Without it, people start thinking they can get away with anything. Next thing you know, they've got chickens and trampolines and paint their front doors black. My chickens never hurt anybody, I said. They made noise, she hissed. They disrupted the order. There it was. The truth, bare and twitching. Judith wasn't defending peace. She was addicted to control. She reached into her bag, pulled out a manila envelope, and thrust it toward me. New violations. Effective immediately. I took it and didn't even look inside. You're wasting paper. Oh, she said, stepping back. Don't worry. The fines will come electronically now. Faster that way. Then she turned and walked away, heels clicking. Against the porch like gunshots, I watched her go. Then I closed the door and locked it, and I got to work. The next 3 days were a blur of coordination. Steve brought in 2 more ex-board members, Maria and Kyle. We met at the corner table of the local diner after dark, documents laid out like blueprints to a heist. Steve had printed copies of the financial records. I had screenshots of the county tax site, photos of Judith's vacant house, statements from neighbors. Kyle, ex-military, quiet and methodical, had brought the receipts from his own interactions with Judith. Fines for a service flag, threats of foreclosure after his wife parked too close to the curb, even audio recordings from old meetings she thought were off the record. She never expected anyone to work together, Maria said, tapping one of the fraudulent payments. She wins by dividing people. Shame, fear, isolation. That's her playbook. Not anymore, I said. We started planning. Meanwhile, Judith went nuclear. One by one, every house that had shown even the slightest hint of rebellion received citations. Decorative rocks, excessive holiday lights, improper use of mulch. She fined an 87-year-old widow for having a bird feeder that encouraged loitering wildlife. A family down the street was threatened with lien placement for hosting a birthday party without proper community authorization. The message was clear: fall in line or suffer. And the community? It was beginning to crack. I saw it in their faces at the mailbox, at the grocery store, in the way people started whispering again instead of speaking freely. She was regaining control, reasserting her power through sheer exhaustion. People were tired of fighting. That's how dictatorships win, not through force, but attrition. We had to act. So we filed a formal complaint, not to the HOA, to the County Ethics Oversight Committee, and we attached everything: the forged address, the financial irregularities, the illegally issued fines, the board manipulation, and most damning of all, a notarized affidavit from Judith's own sister confirming that Judith had been living in Falls Church since September due to personal issues. It was airtight, but we still needed to light the fuse, so I volunteered to be the distraction. I requested a private meeting with Judith, citing the pending court issue. Told her I wanted to discuss a settlement. She agreed, probably thinking she'd broken me, that I was crawling back. We met at the HOA office, a converted room in the community center that she'd renovated into her personal throne room. Framed bylaws on the wall, photos of her cutting ribbons at minor events like she was running for office. She offered me tea. I declined. She sat behind the desk, steepling her fingers like a movie villain. So, she purred. Ready to make peace? Sure, I said, placing a folder on the desk. Here's my offer. She opened it. Inside, a printed list of every fraudulent payment she'd authorized. Highlighted. She froze. For the first time since this war began, she didn't speak right away. You don't want to do this, she finally said. You think you're a hero, but this neighborhood will collapse without me. I smiled. Guess we'll find out. She leaned forward, eyes cold. If you go through with this, I'll ruin you, financially, personally, publicly. I leaned forward too. You already tried. Then I stood up, walked out. As I stepped into the parking lot, Steve sent the text. Complaint filed. They're reviewing now, clock's ticking. I should have felt relief, but I didn't. Because just then, Judith exited the building behind me, phone pressed to her ear, pacing fast, furious, urgent. She wasn't backing down. She was plotting. And that night, she made her biggest move yet. The next morning, every resident in Cedar Creek Crossing woke up to a glossy trifold pamphlet in their mailboxes. Special referendum, emergency vote, to reinstate HOA President Cranley to special executive authority. Inside was a single ballot. No other candidates. No mention of her address. Just a box that said, "I support the continued leadership of President Judith Cranley for the stability of our community." The vote was mandatory. The deadline? 48 hours. But in the fine print, tucked into the very bottom corner, was a new clause. By voting yes, the community affirms President Cranley's standing and retroactively approves any prior administrative inconsistencies. She was trying to rewrite the past. She was trying to erase her crimes. If she got that vote passed, everything we had would mean nothing. But just before I could panic, I got a call from Maria. She was breathless. "I just went through the original HOA charter," she said, "back when it was filed, before Judith revised everything. There's a section she didn't touch." I blinked. "What section?" Her voice dropped. "It gives one person the power to override any HOA president, if they still hold the original charter copy, the one kept in the vault under the community center." I was already grabbing my keys, because I knew where that vault key was. And Judith, she didn't. She didn't know the original charter still existed. She didn't know it was stored in the old filing vault beneath the Cedar Creek Community Center. And she didn't know that the key, an actual dusty brass skeleton key, was buried in the back of the maintenance office's bottom drawer, taped to a post-it note marked, "For historical use only." I knew, because I asked the right person. Harold, the janitor who'd worked here for 18 years and had endured every one of Judith's passive-aggressive memos about improper mopping techniques. He hated her even more than I did. "I always thought she'd get hers one day," he said, fishing out the key with a smirk. "Looks like today's that day." The basement vault was a concrete room beneath the main building, cold and quiet, lined with metal shelves and filing cabinets labeled in faded marker. We found the charter in a manila folder inside an old fireproof box, still stamped with the county seal and dated 1992. It was beautifully simple, only 5 pages long, written before the neighborhood had even been fully built. One clause never amended. The original charter holder may, in the event of executive abuse or administrative violation, override any HOA authority and trigger an emergency leadership audit, provided they present the document at a public HOA meeting with 3 witnesses. A dead man's switch built into the system by people who'd known, even back then, that power has a tendency to rot. I had the document, I had the witnesses, and I had the perfect opportunity. Judith scheduled her referendum vote count for Saturday morning. Of course she did it in the community center's main hall, under a red, white, and blue civic duty banner, surrounded by folding chairs and lukewarm coffee in styrofoam cups. She stood at the front, behind a podium she had no right to stand behind, holding a stack of ballots and addressing a room full of tense, weary residents. "We must preserve the integrity of our neighborhood," she declared, voice amplified and confident. "By voting yes, you've confirmed your trust in our leadership, in me." Some clapped, most didn't. That's when I stepped forward, document in hand, camera rolling. 3 witnesses behind me, Steve, Maria, and Kyle, all stone-faced. Judith saw me, and for a flicker of a second, her composure slipped. I invoke. "Article 1, Section A, Clause 5 of the original charter," I said, projecting my voice across the hall. "Effective immediately." A hush fell across the room. She laughed. "That clause is obsolete. It's never been amended," I said, placing the charter on the table. "Which makes your entire administration illegal, starting from the day you stopped living in Cedar Creek." Gasps, whispers, people shifting in their chairs. Judith opened her mouth, but Maria stepped forward, slamming a folder of documents next to the charter. Proof of residence change, notarized affidavit, financial statements, illegal payments made to your personal account while you were not a legal board member. Judith's voice cracked for the first time. "This is a smear campaign." "No," Kyle said, pulling out his phone. This is your voice. He hit play. If anyone tries to audit me, I'll bury them in fees until they bleed. Her voice, crystal clear, venom-laced. The crowd turned. Murmurs turned to outrage. And Steve delivered the final blow. The County Ethics Oversight Committee has already launched an investigation. They received our full report yesterday. Expect a subpoena. Judith stepped back. No, you don't understand. You don't live here, I said. You've never had the authority. You've spent 6 months terrorizing people while pretending to be something you're not. The room erupted. Questions, shouting, demands. Judith tried to speak, but the crowd surged forward. Her carefully controlled reality shattered in seconds. No one feared her anymore. No one respected her. She was suddenly small, just a middle-aged woman with a stack of fake votes and no real power left to wield. She stumbled away from the podium, red in the face, trying to gather the ballots that didn't matter anymore. You're going to regret this, she spat, desperate and shaking. No, I said, stepping closer. You are. Outside, reporters waited, tipped off by Maria. A local news van captured Judith storming out, pushing cameras aside as residents booed her from the lawn she once ruled like a queen. She sped off in her Lexus, tires screeching. She hasn't been back since. The aftermath wasn't instant peace, but it was change. Judith's financial records triggered a full audit. Her embezzlement was undeniable. HOA funds had paid for her personal travel, spa visits, even a high-end espresso machine delivered to her sister's house. The ethics committee pressed charges. The Cedar Creek board dissolved temporarily while an interim committee restructured leadership. I was asked to join. I declined. Instead, Steve took the lead, honest, steady, and beloved. The first thing he did was repeal 78 bogus bylaws, including the chicken ban. My new hens arrived. A week later, loud, proud, clucking like they owned the place, I named the boldest one Judith. She bites. And the neighborhood? People started talking again, laughing, sharing coffee on porches. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like a community again. Because fear had been replaced by something else. Memory. We remembered what it meant to live together, instead of under someone. Every now and then, someone brings up Judith's name, usually in a joke, occasionally with a lingering grimace. But no one forgets her, especially not me. I kept the original charter, framed it, hung it in my living room, not as a trophy, but a warning. Because sometimes tyranny doesn't arrive with tanks and slogans. Sometimes it wears a coral blouse, carries a clipboard, and finds you for a wind chime. But if you're patient, if you pay attention, you'll find the crack in the mask, and when you do, you tear the whole damn thing off.